Welcome back into another episode of the Spaceman 2.0 Phoenix Truth Rising Show. Here to help you grow in the knowledge and wisdom of truth, and the truth will set you free. With the best history lesson and spiritual insights on the planet, exposure of the Illuminati's plan of world conquest is the death knell to the New World Order. Through the Phoenix Journals and Georgia Sears HATONN commentating on confirmed by authors from around the globe, investigative journalists, those that have done their homework and have researched. Some have lost their lives for putting out this material and getting it to us, like Serge Monast in the 80s about Project Bluebeam and faking an alien invasion with holographic technology, and that's what the Star Wars program was all about, saying we have to blast asteroids from outer space, which is really about making technology that can create direct energy weapons, electrical magnetic frequencies, EMPs, and as well holographic technology to fool us of aliens or even the second coming of Christ coming back. And with the technology, they can blast frequencies into your brain to make you think that you're hearing voices from within you, making you think you're actually hearing God's voice. So in the last episode, thanks for bearing with me. Hopefully you saw the few posts that I put out there about some of our true history lesson. I put out another show. I put it out there 4 months ago. Just wanted to remind you about the Khazarians and how when we talked about the Bolshevik against the Russians, I went into that in the last episode here as well and what that meant. And the Bolsheviks are truly the Khazarian mafia, which has tried to take over the show with communist revolution since almost millennia ago. So with that being said, let's get back on into how the Russians had the COSMOSPHERES and they actually controlled space, and how the new U.S. was trying to create MINUTEMAN TX missiles to be anti-cosmosphere missiles as well, or make anti-cosmosphere missiles as well. And how this has been done since the 1980s, but really it's been done, we're over 100 years behind, since Tesla in 1917 had free energy, and now they're putting it out that we can, charge your battery without plugging it in, charge your phone without plugging it in. They had that energy going through the air back 100 years ago, maybe even 200 or 300 years ago with the Tartarians, and the truth about how they lived. Even the furnaces was really, the way they heat the building and electrify the building was actually through a fireplace type structure, but it really didn't have fire in it. It had another structure that took in the electrical energy from the air, from a big tall steeple, and brought it down into the house and created warmth in a certain other way, electrical way. So it's very interesting, the technology we truly have, and it's truly in our hands. So let's finish off Russians' old hands, and I'm just going to carry on from the second paragraph from the top. I can report that the initial deployment of MINUTEMAN TX missiles is now virtually completed. Now a second phase is underway. HATONN, you had best get nervous, readers. What do you think they have done since 1980? I have described previously a special mobile launch car that carries each MINUTEMAN TX. Now, one by one, each TX car is being joined by a second car. On the outside, it looks just like the TX car, but the missile inside is totally different. The missile in the second car is an anti-cosmosphere missile, or ACM, and it is armed with a cobalt ionization bomb, which I have also described. I have described the launch sequence that is being planned for the TX missiles, but now something extra will also be taking place. When the order comes to launch the TX missiles, the ACM will go into action first. Without waiting to slow down, the cover will be blasted off the ACM railroad car. That will expose the ACM missile itself resting on its launcher. The ACM is far smaller than the Minuteman, and its launcher is angled upwards slightly, so the moment the cover flies off, the ACM will be launched. HATONN, my scribe is now at attention, for I only write recently of things which are very apt to be happening in your own moment of experience. So when Dharma gets insight and nervous, perhaps all of you had best heed the twitching. When the ACM takes off, it will accelerate with 100 times the force of gravity, minimum, Less than 1 second after launch, the ASIM will be traveling more than 1,000 miles per hour, and because it takes off almost horizontally, it will be an impossible target for the cosmosphere overhead to aim at. Less than 10 seconds after launch, the cobalt ionization bomb will explode in the upper atmosphere. That is supposed to disable the cosmospheres briefly, and with the cosmospheres even temporarily neutralized, the Minuteman TX missiles themselves will be launched at Russia. At least that is the plan of the Bolsheviks here. But today, 1992, the Cosmosphere crews can totally disable the tracking devices and nullify the plan. As far back as 1980, you can see what was already underway. But Cosmosphere crews have already been given orders intended to nullify the plan. When the ACM is launched, they will not even try to shoot at it. Instead, they will start firing their charged particle beam weapons at the Minuteman TX railroad car. HATONN, remember, I already told you all about this plan. They will have about 10 seconds to destroy it before the cobalt ionization bombs explode, and that should be more than enough time to vaporize every TX and its locomotive. HATONN, not to mention everything within miles around the area involved. But by that time, the kamikaze nuclear first strike against Russia may be impossible to stop, and if it is, the consequences for America will be total destruction. Stealth and secrecy will end in complete disaster. End. End of quoting. By the way, Dr. Beater was murdered, taken out, following many, many writings and threats on March 14, 1987. And what do you do in your spare time? Chapter 2, Recording Number 2, HATONN, Saturday, June 20, 1992, 1:03 p.m., Year 5, Day 309. Disinformation. I am not going to buffer wording for you, readers. I am not here to quarrel, debate, or straighten up my thinking. This latter is for your dear ones who in good intent write to straighten up HATONN's thinking and clarify HATONN's output. My thinking nor my output is shrouded nor crooked. You want to know about years and what happened, etc., and then set about correcting me when I tell you. That is fine. It would simply seem wiser to me to go and look at where you are today and consider that perhaps I might just be right. You certainly don't have anything to lose by reading my presentations, for goodness has never hurt anyone that I know about. When you consider what happened to Yahweh and Yahweh, Yewao and Jehovah, as well as Jehovah, I have only this to say to you: watch for the clues. Speakers who claim to be speaking in the name of these ones and are disembodied speakers who claim to these names in reference are false. I don't need to carry the argument further, but I will briefly. If these channels speaking for these so-named energy forms tell you exactly where to go, what to do, and when to do it, specifically and finite, watch out. This is not of God in these days. These wondrous names given unto God in the beginning are now utilized almost exclusively by the adversarial troops. You're going to have to get all the information and truth which you can garner, and then measure the output by the guidelines and against the commandments as given by God and creation. It is total simplicity, so I suggest you stop looking for contradictions and follow the guidelines of truth, for they vary not from one speaker to the next. Truth is truth, and will stand into infinity. Ask me about this subject tomorrow at the gathering, and I shall be happy to further discuss it. Creation, creationists. As to creationists of this latter day, they tell you that it appears that creation took place some 10,000 or 22,000 years ago. That alone should give you ample reason to suspect error. There is, for one thing, a lot of years between 10,000 and 22,000, but it does indicate that the cycles as outlaid have a large part to play in the projections of possibilities. Since you have physical proof of elders beyond 22,000 years past, that would take the edge off the whole truth. However, when one considers the truth of the presentation and creation methods of God and projection of manifested experience, anything could be possible. Therefore, Therefore, we have to look first at probabilities and then take higher knowledge as viewed by elder travelers and work from that perception. Perhaps, in overreaction to this creationism, scientists have considered the biblical tale of Genesis as a subject of faith, not fact, and yet Chella's, when one of the rocks brought back from the moon by Apollo astronauts turned out to be almost 4.1 billion years old, it was nicknamed the Genesis rock. So who is efforting to fool who? When a tiny piece of green glass shaped like a lima bean turned up in lunar soil samples gathered by the Apollo 14 astronauts, the scientists dubbed it the Genesis bean. It therefore appears that, in spite of all the objections and reservations, even the scientific community cannot escape the age-old faith, or perhaps truth, belief, inner feelings, or perhaps some genetic memory of the species called mankind, that a primordial truth underlies the narrative of the books considering Genesis. However, the moon became a constant companion to Earth. The various theories must be examined. It, like Earth, belonged to the same solar system, and the histories of both go all the way back to its creation. On Earth, erosion caused by the forces of nature as well as by the life that has evolved on it has obliterated much of the evidence bearing on that creation, to say nothing of the cataclysmic events that changed and revamped the planet. But the moon, so it was assumed, had remained in its pristine condition, with neither winds, atmosphere, nor waters. There were no forces of erosion. A look at the moon was tantamount to a peek at Genesis. Man has gazed at the moon for eons, first with the unaided eye, then with Earth-based magnifying instruments. The space age made it possible to probe the moon more closely. Between 1959 and 1969, a number of Soviet and American unmanned spacecraft photographed and otherwise examined the moon, either by orbiting it or by landing on it. You don't even know about the other nations which have likewise visited that orb. Then man finally set foot on the moon, or so it was stated to you, the public, when the landing module Apollo-II touched down on the moon's surface as reported on July 20th, 1969. I have no wish to contradict what you have been told, for it makes no difference. You have never been an enemy of the Soviet Union, and all information has been shared so that no one has to go anywhere to get very valid information to push off at first hand. But we will simply go with the story. We will remember Neil Armstrong and his announcement for all the world to hear. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Go watch Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. Of course, he did that. Also, they took out 30 minutes of that movie, and he was taken out because he knew about the truth of the moon landing where they filmed it. And I told you about that in the other episode. Lots of lunar hype. In all, 6 Apollo spacecraft presumably set down a total of 12 astronauts on the moon. The last manned mission was that of Apollo 17 in December 1972. The first one was admittedly intended primarily to beat the Russians to the moon, but that didn't work either, for the Soviets were already there, waiting along with a lot of brothers from out there somewhere, and you were invited to withdraw and don't come back. The missions became increasingly scientific as the Apollo program progressed. The equipment for the tests and the experiments became ever more sophisticated, for at least the reports speculated as much. The choice of landing sites was more scientifically oriented. The areas covered increased with the aid of surface vehicles, and the length of stay increased from hours to days. Even the crew makeup changed to include, in the last mission, a trained geologist, Harrison Schmitt. His expertise was speculated as invaluable in the on-the-spot selection of rocks and soil to be taken back to Earth, in the description and evaluation of dust and other lunar materials left behind, and in the choice and description of topographic features, hills, valleys, small canyons, escarpments, and giant boulders, without which the true face of the moon would have remained inscrutable. Instruments were left on the moon to measure and record its phenomena over long periods. Deeper soil samples were obtained by drilling into the face of the moon, but most scientifically precious and rewarding were the 838 pounds of lunar soil and moon rocks brought back to Earth. Their examination, analysis, and study were still in progress as the 20th anniversary of the first landing was being celebrated. Remember what Spaceman on A View from Space said about all the moon missions? If you put all the names together, you get a sentence, and it's a very interesting sentence, especially with the one called Challenger. I think it was blown up as we watched it. I remember watching that, and I remember it being blown up and thinking all those people died, but they didn't. You can see they're still alive to this day. So with that being said, let's move on. Alan, your homework is to look up all the names of the moon missions, and we'll put them all in a comment down below, and I'll put that sentence together for you in the next episode if someone does that. As an exercise herein, walk outside your living quarters right now to a place wherein you can touch Earth. This will be far more expressive if you take someone who lives in rural terrain. Simply first look around you. How far and how much can you see? Pick up a handful of dirt. Is it topsoil added to your own lawn or natural in location? Now move 20 or 30 feet or even 55 miles and look and dig again. Now let us assume you're in Montana or Texas. Have you just learned a single solitary thing about the Grand Canyon? You could utilize 100 tons of soil from the spot wherein you stand, and how much would you learn about the Grand Canyon? How about Yellowstone, the Black Hills, the Aegean Sea, the Sahara Desert? If you don't hearken up, dear ones, you're going to have come experienced and perished without knowing a single worthwhile thing about your passage, how you began, or why you ended. The notion of Genesis rocks to be found on the moon was proposed to NASA by the Nobel laureate Harold Urey. The so-called Genesis rock that was one of the very first to be picked up on the moon proved, as the Apollo program progressed, not to be the oldest one. It was only some 4.1 billion years old, whereas the rocks later found on the moon range from 3.3 billion years old youngsters to 4.5 billion year old timers. Barring a future discovery of some older rocks, they said the oldest rocks on the moon brought its age to within 100 million years, give or take a day or so in either direction, of the estimated age of the solar system of 4.6 billion years, which until then was surmised only from the age of meteorites that struck the Earth and the records of the Sumerians of ancient experience and or the oral traditional teachers of the ancients, Aboriginal people. Age of the moon. Who cares? Who cares? How do you say that in the question? Who cares? Well, in establishing the age of the moon, the time of its probable creation only intensified the debate concerning the question of how the moon was created, and green cheese didn't quite cut it. The hope of establishing the moon's origin was a primary scientific rationale for the manned landings of the Apollo project in the 1960s, or so they told you, wrote a James Gleick in June of 1986 for the New York Times Science Service. It was, however, the greatest question that Apollo failed to answer. How could modern science read an eroded Rosetta Stone of the solar system, so close by, so much studied, landed upon 6 times or so, and not come up with an answer to the basic question? The answer to the puzzle seems to be that the findings were applied to a set of preconceived notions, and because none of these notions is correct, the findings appear to leave the question unanswered. One of the earliest scientific theories regarding the moon's origin was published in 1879 by Sir George H. Darwin, second son of Charles Darwin. However, his father put forth the theory regarding the origin of species on Earth. Sir George was the first to develop a theory of origins for the Sun-Earth-Moon system based on mathematical analysis and geophysical theory. How many of you readers even knew that Charles Darwin had sons? Don't you find this interesting? Again, the Phoenix Journals, the best history lesson and spiritual insights on the planet. George's specialty was the study of tides. He therefore conceived of the moon as having been formed from matter pulled off Earth by solar tides. The Pacific bison was later postulated to be the scar that remained after this pinching off of part of Earth's body to form the moon. Is it not interesting to note that the most unlikely theory The one of Darwin's evolution is the controversial absurdity which took root and flourished. Although it is a hypothesis now considered unlikely to be true, said the Encyclopedia Britannica, the idea reappeared in the 20th century as one of three contenders for being proved or disproved by the lunar reports as furnished by whoever and whatever was out there issuing the information. Given a high-tech name, the fission theory, it was revived with the difference. In the reconstructed theory, the simplistic idea of the tidal pull of the sun was dropped. Instead, it was proposed that the Earth divided into two bodies while spinning very rapidly during its formation. The spinning was so rapid that a chunk of the material of which the Earth was forming was thrown off, coalesced at some distance from the bulk of the earthly matter, and eventually remained orbiting its bigger twin brother as its permanent satellite. Why would it be permanent? How do you know that you both are not just pieces of a giant cosmic fire-breathing dragon's dung bits? Is it any more unspeculative or uninspired? The thrown-off chunk theory, whether it's in its earlier or renewed form, has been conclusively rejected by scientists from various disciplines, which is also routinely the way it is, and for no better reason than just that. Studies presented at the third conference on the origins of life held in Pacific Palisades, California in 1970, so it must all be true, established that the tidal forces as the cause of the fission could not account for the origin of the moon beyond a distance of 5 Earth radii, whereas the moon is some 60 Earth radii away from the Earth. All I see proven is that some idiots gave some opinions in the form of papers and abstracts which have no basis of merit whatsoever, even if they were presented in New Jersey. Also, scientists consider a study by Kurt S. Hansen in 1982, Review of Geophysics and Space Physics, Volume 20, God, spare us from the other 19, as showing conclusively that the moon could never have been closer to Earth than 140,000 miles. This would rule out any theory that the moon was once part of Earth. The moon is now an average distance of about 240,000 miles from Earth, but this distance has not been constant. So with that being said, we're going to get into in the next episode more on the moon theory and its origin, fission theory about the tidal waves or the tides, and more on how the universe or solar system was created. So thank you for tuning in, and thank you to all my subscribers, all my new subscribers. I really appreciate it. All my crypto fans out there, I really appreciate you. Check out the channels of